Hello and welcome to Family Become What You Are. This is Brad Macke, Director of Adult Faith Formation and Outreach at St. Ives, and this is episode 7 of Family Become What You Are. And I want to dig into this topic of parents as primary educators of their children. So I think I've mentioned that in the past in a previous video. So parents have the privilege, the right, the responsibility to educate their own children. This is not granted by the government or the state, and actually it's not even granted by the church. It's just recognized by the church. This is actually a God-given gift and task to educate our children. And it's really rooted in the natural relationship and the natural bond between a parent and their child, between parents and their children. So, but first I want to look at the question, what is a child? And I think there's a lot we can enter into that question really well by thinking about the fact that Jesus said in the Gospels that we must become like a child to enter heaven. So what did he mean by that? So he said we must become like a child. So you could say he said we have to be childlike. And so I think it's really helpful to think about what's the difference between childish and childlike. So I would always ask my high school students this question, and I loved having this conversation with them. And we would list synonyms or attributes of both of those, being childish and childlike. And childish was always easy for them to come up with a long list. So as you would probably the same thing would probably come to mind for you. So childish would include being selfish, being immature, being rude, being lazy, inappropriate, throwing temper tantrums, these kinds of things. The list could go on and on. Of what it means to be childish. So, and not just children can be childish, but adults can also be childish. Okay, so what about childlike? What does it mean to be like a child? Because Jesus tells us as adults that we have to become like a child. So an adult can be childlike. So what does it mean to be childlike? So if we think about these attributes of a child that Jesus is probably talking about, attributes like this come to mind. Wonder. And I would say wonder is not just curiosity of looking for an answer, looking for information, but wonder in a different sense is the response to mystery. So, and mystery doesn't just mean an unsolvable puzzle. The Christian sense of mystery is not just a puzzle we can't figure out, but rather the infinite depth of things, the never-ending depth of things. So the mystery of the world and the mystery of God, the mystery of ourselves, means there's always more to wonder into, always more to ponder. So children have wonder, and they're not always just looking for a rational explanation of things. They might just want to dwell in the mystery, enter into the mystery of the magnitude of things. Related to that is openness. Children are naturally open to people, open to the world, and they haven't been hardened and closed up. Also related to that, children are receptive. They have receptivity to not only be open to things, but to receive from people, to receive into themselves. And a lot of times that receptivity is probably expressed as a weakness, oftentimes in our culture, that to receive a gift seems like, it might seem like a weakness or as a lesser, kind of a lesser stance compared to the giver. But without a receiver, there's never a giver. So there are two equal forms and necessary forms of kind of being. So being childlike means being receptive. Children are dependent. They rely on other people, and that's a good thing. That actually children remind us we're all actually dependent. If we think about where we came from, we didn't even make ourselves. Our existence is dependent on someone else from the get-go. Childlikeness, or children have trust. They put their trust in other people. They're not naturally skeptical, but they put their confidence in people. So childlike, wonder, openness, receptivity, dependence, trust. It makes me think of a form of catechesis, a form of religious education called Catechesis of the Good Shepherd that I discovered several years back. It's really a unique and beautiful form of religious education and it's unique because it begins with what a child is. It begins with what is a child before we seek to educate a child. And what's really awesome about it is the steps in Catechesis of the Good Shepherd actually matches the developmental stages of a child, because it was developed largely on observing children and what they naturally do and what they naturally need in each phase of life. So instead of treating them like a bucket to fill with information or to fill a mind to fill with data, they rather view the child as a soul that we're guiding along a journey, who has wonder and curiosity, openness about the world, about themselves, and about God. So this type of catechesis of the Good Shepherd, it puts a lot of confidence, puts a lot of trust in the natural built-in relationship that a child has with God. So every person, by being created by God, has some basic connection to God. And then through baptism, that's made supernatural. So we become adopted sons and daughters of God. So catechesis of the Good Shepherd trusts that built-in relationship with God and works with it, assists it. So the catechist really becomes a teacher, the catechist or teacher is really someone who becomes a guide to walk with a child, but also a student with them, another student journeying along with them, open to the divine. So maybe the first thing in educating our own children as their primary catechist is entering back into that childlikeness with them. The dispositions and the virtues that go with childlikeness, that wonder, openness, receptivity, trust, dependence, to enter back into that with them. Years ago, as I thought about some of these things, a prayer kind of came to me that I've prayed over the years, which is, Lord, give me the will of a man and the heart of a child. Give me the will of a man and the heart of a child. And I think there's a lot to that, to this preserving this childlikeness, and maybe going deeper into that childlikeness with God. So what does childlikeness show us about education itself? You could say that young children learn most things. They primarily learn by absorption of the people around them, the environment around them, and not much by lecture or just gathering data or information. So the first thing we need to do as parents is model being a true student to them, model being open, wondering, and even the joy of learning. Related to that, the word school, I learned several years back. The word school it's related to the Greek word skole, which has different variants, but you can kind of summarize it by saying skole is the Greek word for restful learning, or leisure. It's actually leisure, which becomes a source of learning. That when we are leisurely and just open, learning naturally happens. And I think we see this with children, they're natural learners. But that requires time, free time, open time, that requires rest. So how could we establish more free time, more rest for this true school or this true skole to unfold in our lives? I think starting with Sunday, do we really rest on Sunday as God calls us to be who we are as human beings, not just workers, but to be fully alive, fully human, to start with this free time and this rest and see what happens from there. And our children can really help us with this, as they can be a teacher and a guide to us as we also are a teacher and a guide to them. So stay tuned in for next week's video, next week's episode. It will be on something you can concretely do with your child, maybe 10 minutes a day, to practice this, to be a student with your child.